Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to another in the ISM Lunch and Learn webinar series. Today we're going to be looking at fixed assets depreciation with a Sage guru, Mr. Wayne Austin. Wayne is with the Sage Group, and he'll be showing us his products, and as well he'll be showing us fixed asset tracking on next Tuesday. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. The lines will be muted to prevent background noise during the presentation. However, we will open them up at the end for questions. Also, if a question does come up during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat pane or the question pane, and we'll address those at the end. Thank you. And with that, Wayne, I'm going to turn everything over to you. Welcome.
Hello, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Wayne Austin. I'm a sales engineer with Sage Software, and we'll be going through our Sage Fixed Assets solution today. Okay, so just to give you a quick overview of what we will be covering, we're splitting this Lunch and Learn into two episodes. So today I will actually cover the depreciation module, as well as talk a bit about the custom reporting features within that. And on next Tuesday, I will talk about the tracking module and the planning module. I'll also touch briefly on the integration with our other Sage ERP products, such as Sage 100 and 500, and most of the time will actually be spent today demonstrating the software so you can see how it actually works. But let's first talk a little bit about why buy a fixed asset solution. So some people will say, hey, I can do this in an Excel spreadsheet, but there are some downsides to doing that. You can't ensure that your spreadsheet is going to accurately meet the latest IRS GAAP rules if there's errors in your formulas, things like that. And it's also not Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. Other problems you may have, sure, it might be able to get you there in the end, but it's not necessarily the best vehicle for doing so. Updating your spreadsheets, of course, can be time consuming. Transferring your data to general ledger via manual entry, of course, there's room for errors in that scenario. Other issues, of course, if you don't have a vehicle for accurately tracking and inventorying your assets, you can certainly have situations where you have ghost assets or assets that should be off the books, you have not disposed, you're still paying property taxes on, insurance on, things like that. So having a good solution in place is going to actually help you overcome all of those things. And the Sage Fixed Asset solution has modules that addresses all of your fixed assets needs really from cradle to grave. So it's going to ensure that you meet all of your tax rules compliance. The software is continually updated for all of the tax rule changes for federal tax rules for the US and Canada, by the way. And as you know, there was a pretty large update to the tax rules this year. So for those of you who have not done your taxes yet, you still have time to actually get the solution in place and take advantage of those tax rule changes. Of course, it's going to reduce redundant data entry because of that integration with ERP products. So for example, in the 100 or 500 side, you can actually create assets from your Sage 100, for example, where you can create assets while doing your AP or PO modules. It's also going to reduce risk surrounding any type of compliance issues. And you're going to be able to completely track and manage your assets through their complete life cycle. So the planning module, in this case, for example, can handle all of your CIP needs before your assets become assets while they're in the construction or in a project phase. So the solution, as I mentioned, really is created by using 4 different modules, the depreciation being the heart of it, which handles all of your financial depreciation for tax, GAAP, your state AMT books. And for the planning module, will handle all aspects of budgeting for a project, as well as creating assets once they're ready to be placed in service. The tracking module is for doing physical inventory and reconciliation, and there's a custom reporting feature available that will give you a full version of Crystal Reports 2016, but it's fully integrated into the software and into the database, so you can actually leverage this, for example, in doing custom reports in the depreciation module, or even doing custom reports in the planning module. This is just a quick snapshot from inside of the new version of Sage 100, where you can have a visual workflow so that it'll help you walk through the process much easier while doing accounts payable or purchase orders, where you'll be able to actually tell it to create assets in the depreciation module, and you can actually even launch Sage Fixed Assets module from inside of Sage 100 or 300 for that matter. So I'm actually going to go ahead and jump into the software so we can take a look at how the solution works. Okay, so there's a couple of different versions of the software. There's, of course, a standalone standard version. There's a network standard as well as a premier version. And the difference is capacity. The network standard, for example, will typically handle up to about 10 or 15,000 assets. The premier version will handle over 1 million assets, and that actually runs on a SQL Server database. But a majority of the functionality that I will cover today is going to be the same. There are some additional features that will be in the Premier modules that I may touch on a bit later on. So one of the things that you can do when opening your company, for example, you can have multiple companies in your database. So if you have multiple subsidiaries, you can certainly do that in the companies, in the database. Now, the snapshot that I'm actually opening here, you can actually get a quick overview of what's going on overall with your assets. So in my particular sample data here, you can see my total net value of all of my assets, and it even breaks it down by what's active, what's disposed, transferred, and so on. I can even get a quick view of what's been placed in service by quarter. So if you are handling the tax book, for example, you would be able to see when Q4 rolls around, if you exceed that 40% placed in service threshold, you can actually quickly act and do a mid-quarter convention switch quite easily in the system. You can also get a quick view of what's fully depreciated by percent, even look at a 5-year acquisition, as well as a depreciation comparison by book. And that particular snapshot is available at any point, simply by going to reports and going to that snapshot. Now I'm in my main list view for all of my assets. So if you have an organization that has multiple locations, multiple departments, you may want to be able to segment this view by creating different groups, and you can create groups based on any type of criteria, location, asset class, or anything like that. So you can create different segments or subsets of your assets if you want to be able to report on them separately, or even sort and subtotal by any of those criteria. I'm going to go into one of my asset details here. Now I'm in one of my asset details just to give you a quick look at what are some of the fields that you can customize, what kind of information can you capture about your assets. All of these fields, which we call general information fields, are completely customizable. You can easily create smart lists, for example, with all of your GL account codes. If you want to use a single parent company and create multiple subsidiaries within that single company, you can leverage using one of these fields, for example, to identify different companies. But if you need to do separate tax reporting individually, you can certainly create separate companies in the system, where in this case, this would represent a single company. All of these fields, as I stated, are customizable. And if you are interested in doing physical inventory and barcoding your assets, this particular field is the field that would be used to capture that barcode number or asset tag, as opposed to the system number, which is going to be automatically assigned by the software. There's also a couple of custom date fields that you can use for any date-related information you want to capture, and that's going to be separate from the acquisition and placed in service date. And if you choose to create smart lists, for example, all of your GL account codes, those are all quite easy to create in the system. Now, there's a few other tabs here I want to talk about real quick. The notes area, you can use that for capturing any type of information about your assets. It's clear text. You can type in pretty much anything you want to. And in my case, since this is actually a delivery van, I'm simply using this to keep track of my routine maintenance. You can also attach images of the assets, invoices, receipts, or anything that you choose to, and you can actually do this through the image manager. So if, for example, you want to attach a single image to multiple assets, you can actually do that. And you can see here, I've got a single image actually attached to three different assets. It'll actually take a variety of file types, so you can attach PDFs, JPEGs, bitmap, PNG, or GIF files. So you've got quite a bit of flexibility in the types of information that you can attach. And of course, like I said, you can actually link these files to a variety of assets in one shot. So if, for example, you ordered 20 computers in a single invoice and you want to attach that invoice to all of them, you can easily do that. Now let's talk a little bit about the book fields down below. So there are 7 books included in the system. Of course, your tax, your internal book, state, AMT, ACE, and the 2 custom books on the end, you can easily rename these 2 for anything you choose to. And that's actually done in the company settings, where I could simply go in and type in a different display name if I choose to. I can also here set my fiscal year ends. They can be different for any of the books, but I can also turn off any of the books that I'm not using. Short years are also supported, so you can enter that information here. And of course, book overrides can also be specified here as well. Now, with regards to these book fields, any asset being added, these 5 are what we would call critical depreciation fields. So you must have property type defined, place in service date, acquisition value, depreciation method, as well as estimated life. And for any of you that are using ADS Life, that is also supported here as well. You can have assets that are 100% business use or some other percentage. And of course, you can enter information for Section 179 if you qualify for that as well. Now, if you look below all of the information down below in blue, this is going to be your output side. So based on what information you place here, it's going to determine, what's calculated. So if, for example, you're importing your assets from a spreadsheet initially, you will want to ensure you capture your original place in service date, value, and so on. But if you've done a prior year adjustment, you can actually bring that information in as well, which would be factored in. So you would bring in that beginning date, beginning year date, beginning accumulated depreciation, and of course that would also impact how that asset is going to depreciate. Now, for those of you that may want to take advantage of that change to the tax rules, we actually have all of the tax law changes built into the system as a quick reference. So for example, you want to get up to speed on what has changed in bonus depreciation, you can go to help, what's new, click on learn more, and I can actually now go in here and take a look at what the old law specified, what the new law specifies, as well as see the table that will impact how these assets are treated. So for example, if your asset was acquired before September 28 of 2017, placed in service after, what the rules are surrounding that versus ones acquired and placed in service after. We've also, of course, got all of the changes tied to impacting Section 179, or there were some changes to vehicle limits. All of that information is built in here as a quick reference for you. Now, if you do want to take advantage retroactively so that tax rule changes, you can simply go up here to depreciation, click on the 168 allowance switch, and you can actually apply that to an individual asset, to all of your assets, and easily make that switch from the 50% to the 100% bonus simply by specifying your fiscal year, which would be 2017 in this year case, where it's retroactive to, and the associated books. Now, it will only make the change to assets that qualify. So this particular asset here I'm looking at was placed in service in 2001, so that certainly would not qualify. But if you go to an asset that was placed in service December of 2017, of course, when I went ahead and applied that change, if you notice, that asset did go to 100% bonus. So it does selectively apply it based on place in service date, the depreciation method you're using for bonus, and will only apply that change where it meets all of the criteria. Another change you can easily make, for example, if you do need to make a mid-quarters convention switch at year end, if you do exceed that 40% placed in service, you can actually do that from the depreciation tab there, where I can simply select to change from half-year convention to mid-quarter. Same rules apply here, the fiscal year associated for the assets placed in service, and of course the books that you want to make that change applicable to. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my asset list view. And by the way, this is also completely customizable. So you can choose what information you want to see in what order you want to be able to see it in, and quite easily adjust that. Simply by clicking here, customize a field, and you can change the order or what information is actually displayed here. So you have full control of that. So I want to talk a little bit now about how disposals and transfers are impacted. So if you want to be able to do a transfer within a company, in the company settings, you can actually determine how you want transfers handled. So I can do it by location, department, GL asset account. You can simply choose what field you'd want that to be effective. So if I want to be able to, for example, do a transfer or a disposal of a group of assets, I can simply search for them or manually select them. So I'm actually just going to do a quick search for all of my computers, let's say. So I'm just going to use a vague search, description contains, but of course I can be more specific or choose any of the other fields as my search criteria. So I've just identified all of the computers in my company, so I can now select all. And if I want to do a bulk transfer of all of these assets, I can simply select it here. And of course, I can future date, let's make it today's date, whatever my needs are as far as my transfers. And I can do the same with my disposals as well. So in this case, if I want to do a bulk disposal, for example, I can decide here, okay, what cash proceeds did I receive from this bulk disposal? Of course, I can apply any expenses of sale, but I do want to point out that if you're doing a bulk disposal in this manner, it's going to evenly distribute that across all of the assets associated here. And of course, I can do sale, abandonment, taxable exchange, whatever makes sense. And the same rules apply for if I want to do a bulk transfer in this manner. And as I stated in my particular case, I have it set to do my transfers by location. So it's going to show me my full list of locations so I can choose from, but I can also transfer assets between companies. So I can see any of the other companies I have in my database of the same type. So US companies to US companies or Canadian company to Canadian company. Because of the difference in tax rules, you can't transfer between different company types. Now I will go into actually doing an actual transfer of an individual item as opposed to doing it in bulk, so you can get a better feel for how that process would work. So if I wanted to go ahead and transfer this asset, I'll just use today's date. And if I'm going to do it within my current company, as I stated, it's showing my current location as well. I can choose where I want to actually send this to. So let's say I'm going to transfer this asset to store number 1. And you can also go ahead and select edit general information here, because if you notice, it will actually change my location field from store number 4 to store number 1, but there may be other things you want to change as part of the process. So I can simply say yes here, and I can now go in and change other information such as GL account code, maybe it's a different building number, site number, or any other information, as well as enter notes about why I'm doing this transfer for my own reference, so I can go back and see exactly what I did. And the notes, by the way, here will also show up in your reports. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. I'm go ahead and do my transfer. So this takes you right to the transactions tab. So if you notice now, everything is grayed out here, because what it will do, it will go ahead and actually stop depreciating of this current original asset in its original location, but it would also go ahead and create a new asset that's going to continue depreciating exactly where this one left off. So let me make that bigger. So you can see here that my current accum, net book value, all of that information is going to be the same as where the other asset left off. So if I go back to the previous asset, you would be able to see that exactly where this asset stopped depreciating. So all of your reports you run up through the prior to the date of the transfer, it's going to reflect this asset under the old location, original GL account information, and as of the date of the transfer going forward, of course, it'll pick up depreciation at the new location, new cost center, and so on. Okay. Of course, I can come in, review this information at any point, and there is a really good audit trail, so you'll be able to see everything that's going on with the asset. It's going to show the asset was transferred, date it was transferred, and who actually transferred it. Now, you can restrict who can do things such as transfers, disposals, and so on, simply by going to the system administration. And you can actually go into the company profiles and choose to restrict any user. So for example, you may have two different groups of users. Some are in the default profile of full access, but you can create a more restricted profile where you can limit a variety of activities such as transfers, disposals, setting or clearing period closes, or even who can access certain reports. Okay. So, by the way, if you do make a mistake, so let's say someone gave you the wrong asset to transfer, the wrong information, you need to be able to undo this. You can actually go in and delete last transaction and completely undo that transaction, even if it was sometime in the past. This particular asset was previously transferred, and I simply went in and undid it. And you can actually see in the audit trail all of the information. This asset was originally transferred back in April, and I went ahead and reversed the transaction today. So you're going to see last transaction deleted, okay, and the date it was done, and of course, who did it. Now, let's talk a little bit about disposals and even partial disposal. So in addition to being able to do, of course, bulk disposal of a large group of assets, you can do an individual or partial disposal as well. So if I want to dispose of this particular asset by sale, let's say it might be a group of assets bulk together. They could be same cost or dissimilar cost. Of course, I can do sale, abandonment, like-kind exchanges. If I'm going to do a partial disposal, it will actually prompt me here to enter the amount that I want to dispose. So in this case, my original acquisition value was $2,400. So let's say I want to dispose of $800 off that original value. It's going to calculate out my remaining amount, and this $1,600 is actually what would continue depreciating going forward for the remaining life of that group of assets. I can go ahead and enter my cash proceeds. So let's say I'm getting $700 in cash proceeds, and maybe I have $50 in expenses tied to that, shipping it off or whatever the case may be. I can actually calculate my gain loss, and you can see the difference here calculated across my various books. I'm doing bonus depreciation in my tax book, straight line in my financial book. I can even choose to defer recognizing it or not recognizing this. And of course, I can manually set my gain loss information. If you're using investment tax credits, you can certainly reflect that here as well. I can pull up my disposal worksheet where I can review any information about the transaction. And for those of you managing the tax book, or if you're doing section 179 or bonus depreciation, you will be able to see here any recapture information calculated as well. So if I say, okay, I want to go ahead and do my disposal, my partial disposal, again, it'll take you to the transactions tab where I can come back and review the transaction, or if an auditor wants to get a printout of that worksheet, you can certainly print it out or export it. All of the reports, by the way, in the system are exportable in a variety of formats: Crystal reports, PDF, CSV, Excel, or even XML. So you have a lot of options for how you can export any reports in the system. Again, the audit trail is going to capture quite a bit of information regarding that transaction. So you'll see here the asset was partially disposed, the date it was done. You'll also see that it was a partial disposal and the date of the gain loss calculation. So this will be date in the system, and this could be future dated or some other date. So it shows the two separately as well as who did it. Now, it'll also show you information about what was changed. So in the case of a partial disposal, my original acquisition value in this case was $2,400. I disposed of $800 of it. So it's going to show my remaining value that's going to continue depreciating across all of my books that I made that effective for. So it gives you quite a bit of information with what's going on with the asset. And of course, the transaction can also be reversed here if you need to be able to do that. Okay, so you can do just a quick recap of that. You can do partial transfers, partial disposals. You can do bulk transfers, bulk disposal, or just an individual transfer of or disposal. And of course, transfers can be done within the same company. You can do transfers between companies as well. And if you choose to not recognize a gain, let's say you're transferring between companies, you can even transfer as a disposal and not take a gain in the original company if you need to defer that for some reason and transfer the asset to another company. So you do have all of those types of options. Okay, now there's several ways you can actually add assets into the system. So of course I can manually go in here and select add an asset. So some of the things that's going to be helpful here is actually utilizing templates, because if I created smart lists, of course, with all of my GL account codes, things like that, I could easily do that. If I've got asset classes defined, easy enough to do. But what's even better is if you actually create templates. So if, for example, I'm going to add a new computer, I actually have templates here and a couple of different ones that I did for computers where I can populate any of the common information for that type of asset. So in this case, I've got a basic description, all of my GL account codes. I've even included my depreciation methods as part of my template. So whenever I'm adding a new computer, I would simply need to go in here and give it an actual acquisition, place, and service date, give it a value, and I'm done. So it makes that process much easier. Now, another reason that templates are actually important is that any of the templates I create here in the depreciation module are going to be available over in my Sage 100 or Sage 300, for example, where if I'm telling it to create assets from a purchase order or accounts payable side, I can tell it to apply the template. So those assets would then be created here with all of the information, not just a place and service date and a value. So templates are very helpful for those reasons, and you can define templates in any way you choose to, populate any information that you want, asset class, depreciation methods, and so on, and save it as a template. Name it, of course, something intuitive that you can easily identify, and you can actually leverage that. Now, the planning module, which handles all of the CIP or projects, will also have access to these templates so that when you're sending assets from the CIP side to become fixed assets placed in service, you can also apply templates there. So that's another good reason for using that process. Now, additionally, if you've got multiple assets in, for example, and this is the process I actually use with creating some of my computers here, I could actually do the first one from a template, and I can simply go here and tell it, you know what, I've got 10 computers in. I went ahead and did the first one, tell it to create 9 copies, and it's going to duplicate this 9 more times. And I can simply go in and change anything that's unique, such as a serial number or an asset ID tag. Those would be unique fields for that type of asset. Other than that, I would be ready to go. So it really is extremely helpful in doing that. So let me actually spend a bit of time talking about running depreciation as well as the reporting side. So if I take a look at my asset details now, if you notice a couple of the fields identifies in the book area here, it will even show you what your prior depreciation through date is, current depreciation through date. Okay, so you can actually run depreciation for any period that you choose to, and you can run it on just a group of assets, or you can run it for all of your assets, so you have flexibility there. Most people are running their depreciation on a monthly basis, but you can certainly select any window in time which books you want to run it for. You can also have it run your depreciation expense report right from here. So if I go ahead and rerun my depreciation for April, I can tell it to go ahead and run my depreciation expense, where I can quickly see that information. And I will actually go into the full reporting tab so that we can go a little bit deeper into the reports. Now, on this particular report, if you notice now, I just went ahead and ran it completely unsorted, but you can sort and subtotal these reports in a variety of ways, up to 3 layers. So for example, I wanted to sort and subtotal this by location, or I wanted to add a sub level below that, let's say by asset class or GL asset account. I could actually do all of the above. So this is your standard depreciation expense report, just run unsorted and in full details, where it's going to show all of the grand total information on the very bottom. Of course, less any transfers or disposals. And it does show your prior depreciation through date, your current run, so that you easily know that this is looking at 1 month of depreciation. So now, before I go into the reports area, I just want to mention, I did say there's other ways of bringing assets in. Let's say you have several thousand assets. You certainly don't want to go through the process of adding an asset this way, where you're manually doing all of this for thousands of assets. So of course, I'm sure you're thinking, can I import this from Excel? And you can. There's an actual import wizard where you can import the assets from a spreadsheet, but you'll want to ensure that you have all of the information that you need in that spreadsheet. So if, for example, you have a spreadsheet that has a variety of information uh, in that spreadsheet, you'll certainly want to ensure that you're capturing all of that and mapping these fields over. So in my particular case here, this spreadsheet, if you notice, my column headings are in row 6, but my data actually starts in row 12. You'll want to ensure that you have depreciation methods correctly identified. The must-have, of course, place and service date, whatever your acquisition cost is, property types. So you need to ensure that you have those mandatory fields identified in your spreadsheet, and then you can actually import um, from a spreadsheet directly into the fixed asset module. So let me actually walk through, before I go into the report section, just what that looks like, just a brief import. So I'm simply going to browse out to my sample data, and this will take flat files, by the way, so tab delimiter or CSV, or standard Excel, the old version or new version of Excel. So in my case here, I'm just going to be using a CSV file where I have some sample data. And of course, since I have multiple companies, I can choose which company I actually want to import this into. Okay. And the first time I do this, I'm bringing in new assets, I'm going to have to actually create a field mapping. And this is where I'll be able to see a preview of my spreadsheet. So it's going to actually show me what it looks like, what it sees in that spreadsheet. If you look at my row 1, here's all of my column headers, as opposed to the other spreadsheet that I showed a moment ago, where my row 6 was my column headers. This one is row 1, and then row 2 is where my data actually starts. You need to make sure that you're pointing the beginning import where the data starts, which in this case is in row 2. And then what you would do is go ahead and map out your column headers to the available fields in the database. So in this case, my column A is going to go to my asset ID, my column B is description, and so on. And once you finish mapping that out, you'll want to save that field mapping so that you can reuse that for future imports. So I'm actually going to use one that I previously saved so that you can see what that looks like. So here is an example. These are fields that I did not select to map anything to, and these are the ones that I did select to map things to. So you'll want to ensure you're mapping, for example, a text field to a text field in the database. It will not convert text to numeric and so on. So if you have any errors, you can actually, if it's simply related to a mapping issue, you can simply fix that quite easily in the system. So I'm actually going to use an incorrect field mapping to generate some failures so I can actually show you what it looks like when that has failed. Because in this particular case, I'm mapping, for example, asset class, which is the text field, to a date field. I have quite a bit of data missing, so this should actually generate all failures. So if you look at this now, I do have 205 line items, but none of them are valid. All are invalid. Any invalid records it will not bring in, but you can actually pull up the report quite easily so you can see, okay, what's really wrong here? It's going to show you that, okay, I can't convert this text to a date field. Same here, I can't convert text to a numeric field. So it's going to show you what line number, what it sees wrong. If your character count exceeds the column width, it will bring it in, but as you can see, it's going to truncate that data. If you look at these other fields below, critical depreciation fields I mentioned can't be blank. So you must have a depreciation method defined. Estimated life must be defined. So I would simply export this out to PDF or Excel and go back into my spreadsheet and fix it. But of course, if it's just an issue of mapping, I can fix this here. Hey, I've got the asset class mapped to a date field. I can pull that out, map it where it really should go. Just want to make sure I showed you that process for those of you that are thinking of doing your own import. Of course, the folks at ISM would be happy to help you out with your data migration. So don't forget you have our resources available there. So let me jump into the report section now and talk about some of those. Of course, the big question for those of you, for example, using Sage 100, how do I get my journal entry over? So if I run my standard general ledger report, you'll be able to see what the report looks like. But if you're using 100 or 300, for example, with that direct integration, Sage 100 will actually pull this data from the depreciation module. Sage 300, it will actually format the report for Sage 300 and place it in a file where Sage 300 can retrieve it. So the type of integration varies slightly, where of course in Sage 100 you're getting the most. Okay, and you can, by the way, drill down if you want to see the actual asset details below that. Okay, so in the case of Sage 100, you would not even need to run it. As soon as you run depreciation, okay, that information is going to be available to Sage 100. Now, some great tax reporting is also available here. You can actually generate your own 4562. And this is an actual fileable form. So if I was at my year end, for example, as opposed to my end of Q1 here, it would actually even generate the worksheet that goes along with this as well. Okay. And it's both pages and it's an actual fileable form. So of course you can export this out to a PDF. Now, we do have an output to CCH Pro. So if any of you are using CCH Pro for your tax software, it can actually be integrated with CCH Pro. Of course, your 4797 worksheet, of course, another important tax report. Oops. So you can actually generate this worksheet as well. And there are several other tax reports, such as a tax expense report, property tax reports as well. So there's quite a few different tax reports you can actually do. Now, for those of you that might need to run things like the depreciation expense that I shared with you earlier, you can actually run that and sort and subtotal it. This is where you would actually do that, where I can sort and subtotal by asset class or up to 3 layers as well. Now I can even go beyond that and actually customize these reports, and I can actually export this out to a CSV, to Excel, or even out to Crystal reports. So I did mention earlier that you have the availability of getting a full-blown version of Crystal reports, which is integrated in our database. This is just a sample Crystal report, where, as you can see, I have access to every field in the database. I can create any type of report that I choose to. But for my standard report, I could simply export this out to Crystal and customize it further, or I can export it out to Excel or print it, whatever I choose to. But as you can see, when I ran it earlier, it was just system number 1 through the end, and I went ahead and ran it now where I have it sorted and subtotaled by asset class, as you can see. And I can do up to 3 layers of sort. They'll each give you their own net totals, and of course you'll get the same grand total information at the very end. Okay. And actually, with that custom reporting feature, so natively, you can always go ahead and, of course, change sort order. You can save it as a custom reports. All of these here in yellow are actually ones that I customize that you can create many versions of the same reports. So that's, automatic. Now, depending on the version of the software you get, if you get the standalone depreciation module, this custom reporting feature here is an option. But if you bundle it with any other module, you'll automatically get the custom reporting feature. Or if you get the SQL Server version, the Premier version, you'll also automatically get this custom reporting feature. What that does, in addition to give you the Crystal Reports option, you can actually go into these reports and on the fly, add or remove columns of data, change the orientation. So let's say, for example, you want to run a report like this that may not have net book value as one of the columns. You can actually go ahead and add a column like that, current net book value, and you have access to all of the fields, by the way. So you can go in there and modify it significantly an existing report. So the short version of what you're getting there value-wise is all your reporting needs are going to be met here in the system, whether natively within the system with the standard reports, or if you need to do some advanced reporting, you can get that custom reporting feature. Okay. Now, there are a couple of projection reports that I wanted to touch on briefly. There is a monthly projection where you can actually look at monthly period expense, for any of the books, of course, and I'm just going to run off my current fiscal. I can future date this out in the 2019, 2020, whatever year I choose to, and actually see what that period expense is going to be and year to date for each period during my fiscal. So I actually have an asset here that I place in service out in the future. So if I go out to 2020, and run that same report, you'll notice a significant change. So if you want to, for example, place and service out into the future a dummy asset just to use for forecasting, if you know that you have a large project coming online and that's going to have some impact, you can actually do that. So if you notice, my year to date was decreasing, and it's certainly increasing here, and especially at the end of 2020, I can drill down and look at the actual details. Okay. And if I go to the last page, you will actually see that I placed some asset out here into the future that's impacting that. So the monthly expense, again, shows you period expense and year to date for each period during the fiscal, and you can look at this anywhere in the future that you choose to. Now, the annual projection is going to show you actually full year depreciation, and then this one will actually do a side-by-side comparison. So if I want to look multi-years out in the future, I can actually do that. And I can, of course, sort and subtotal this in different ways. If I want to be able to see this sorted and subtotal by asset class or by location or by state or whatever it may be, I can actually do any of the above with doing these projections. And same rule apply. If I do want to see how is some future project or a group of assets is going to impact things out in the future, I can actually place some asset and service out in the future and see its impact. So I'm looking at multiple books and looking 10 years out from my current fiscal. So this is another great forecasting tools. Of course, there will be other standard reports you need to do, such as current year additions, things like that, and you may want to sort that by class or whatever it may be. And many of these reports, by the way, if you notice in my preview here, this particular report I'm going to run, the annual activity, does not include descriptions of the assets. So in some of these cases, you may want to actually have that description of the assets, so you can simply turn it on, extend asset description, and you can even summarize assets with no activities just to shorten your report and run that in the same way. And of course, you can choose to have it in details or in subtotals only if, for example, you just want to see summaries. So here is that annual activity report, which now, if you notice, it does include a description. Okay. Assets that were not added during the current year, of course, are going to be summarized to $0 because it was not added in the current year. And the ones that were, you'll see that value. And of course, on the very last page, you'll actually see your totals for your current year additions, current year dispositions as well. Now, the other two reports that are probably going to be most important to you are going to be your disposal report and your transfer report. And they do have disposal report and partial disposal report, as well as transfer and partial transfer. So if, for example, I want to look at my disposal report, I can set this to run based on a date range. So I think I will run this from 2016 just to get a wider span here. And this will show, of course, all of your realized gain loss info, which you're typically going to be running this for either for a quarter or for the full fiscal, and capture this information. I just went a little further back to capture some more information. So as you can see, it's going to show the date range you're running it for, your realized gain loss info. And if you choose to not recognize anything like I showed you in the disposal process, you can actually do that. All of that will be captured here as well. Now, the partial disposal report on the other side of this is going to show this information a bit differently, because you will be able to see any percentages that are tied to those partial disposals, and the same with the transfer versus partial transfer report. So if you've done multiple partials to the same asset, you'll see that same system number showing up more than once, and it'll show you, what percentage was done each time. So in this particular, and I'll make this a little bigger here, you'll see my asset and service date. In this case, it was a piece of land. I put a note in there as part of my partial. I sold off 10 acres, and here's the percentage that I actually sold off, and the value of what I sold was 200,000. My remaining value is shown here. So this is also information that you're going to need at year end if you are in fact doing partial disposals or partial transfers. And the partial transfer report, I'll go ahead and run that one as well, will show you any of those partials that you may have done. In my case here, during my current period, I only have the one thing that was partially transferred, but it's going to show you, of course, system number. If I've done this multiple times, but that same system number, that would be reflected here as well. The date of the transfer, the value, okay, the original value of the asset, the percent transferred, the amount transferred, and the remaining value. So it does show you all of the information regarding those partial transfers. So again, you have full transparency of everything that is going on with the assets. So, okay, so with that being said, I know we have a very limited time here to cover a lot of these details. If you are interested in seeing a full demonstration of the product, absolutely reach out to Cherry or any of your contacts here at ISM, and we'll be happy to schedule an individual product demonstration for you to go over the product in more depth. And as I stated, next week, for those of you that will be joining us again on Tuesday, I will cover the tracking module for doing physical inventory and reconciliation, identifying your ghost or zombie assets, as well as a planning module for handling any CIP or projects that you may have, and how it manages the budget for those projects and allows you to create assets from those projects. So with that, we just have a few moments remaining. I want to pause so that I can respond to any questions that may have come in during this call.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm going to open up the lines to questions. I've checked the chat pane and the question pane, and I see no questions. Do we have any questions out there? It doesn't sound like it. So with that, Wayne, I want to thank you very much for such a wonderful presentation. Everyone, please be aware that this has been recorded and it will be shared out on our YouTube channel, the ISM YouTube channel, within the next 48 hours. With that, Wayne, I look forward to your presentation next week on fixed asset tracking, and I thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.